Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's program. On behalf of the Executives Club, welcome to Iconic Leadership, a conversation with Mary Dillon. Tonight, we're going to explore Mary's approach to leadership, her strategy, her strengths, and the innovative thinking that has defined her work, transforming some of the most recognized brands in business. My name is Jessica Fairchild. I am the founding partner and president at Croak Fairchild Duarte & Barris. As a Chicago headquartered law firm, we are very proud to sponsor today's program. Our firm counsels boards, executives, and company leaders on cutting edge and business critical matters, spanning broadly from transactions to litigation. As one of the fastest growing law firms in the country to be certified as a women's business enterprise, we also believe deeply in supporting women in leadership. That's why we are so excited today to be here from Mary and to be sponsoring this program. Mary has spent her career at the helm of globally recognized consumer brands with leadership roles at McDonald's and US Cellular, transforming ULTA Beauty into a category-defining powerhouse and guiding Foot Locker through a critical period of reinvention. But tonight's conversation is about more than any single role. It's about the through line of leadership, judgment, resilience, and conviction that enable certain leaders to navigate complexity, drive transformation, and leave a lasting mark. Mary's journey offers a rare window into how enduring leaders think, act, and evolve. Mary will be joined in conversation by Dory McWhorter, the president and CEO of the Executives Club of Chicago. So please join me in welcoming Mary and Dory to tonight's presentation.
Thank you. Is this on? Thank you, Jessica. We so appreciate you. And I'm sure everyone knows who's Mary and everyone knows who's Dory on this stage, but just in case, I'm Dory McWhorter. I get the honor of having the conversation with Mary tonight. We're also excited because this is the first program in what we're calling our Iconic Leadership Series. And quite frankly, Mary, you are the inspiration for this particular series. So this is the series where we are going to be showcasing individuals who have sustained, grown, and transformed businesses throughout their career. And at the club, we know that business plays a significant role in advancing society, and these iconic leaders have made significant contribution to really shaping what we would consider our shared future. And so who best than you, Mary, to kick off this series with? So,
wait, I have a question. Does iconic equal old and you've been around a while? Because I'm your gal.
No, because Beyonce is also iconic, and she's not old, so.
I'm totally teasing you. Dory and I go way back.
Oh, yeah. So, you know, Jessica gave such a great background about Mary, but I do want to sort of highlight a few items. So really to put this iconic leadership into perspective for you. So we know that Mary served as the CEO of US Cellular, ULTA Beauty, and Foot Locker, but Mary is only one of 3 female CEOs to helm 2 Fortune 500 companies. She currently... I hate to do this to you, Mary, but we got to say this. What? So she serves on the board of KKR, which we know is one of the largest private equity firms. She previously served on the board of Starbucks. She was recently named to the American Airlines board of directors, and she's been named one of Fortune's most powerful women twice, and one of the world's best CEOs by Barron's. So.
You must have gotten the email from my mother.
I actually think Beyonce can learn a few things from you. So, but this is where I really get fangirlish over Mary. We talked about what she did and what she's done in her career, but not exactly who she is. So one of the reasons that I've come to know Mary and really have appreciated her is that what comes through is her extreme love for humanity. That's something I think we both share. And Mary was recently named board chair of Save the Children. I don't know if you know this, they were an audit client of mine back in the day. We never talked about that. Yeah, and she has received the Sandra Taub Humanitarian Award for Philanthropic Leadership. Mary believes strongly in mentorship, especially for other women business leaders. And she doesn't just talk the talk, she walks the talk. She's incredibly kind and a dear friend to so many, and I know many of you in this room that is to be true of. And she's a Chicago native, one of 6 siblings, and a mom to 4 adult children, and a grandmother with another one on the way. So we really appreciate you spending time with us today. So as we thought about this iconic leadership, and Mary and I, when we were first doing some prep, I was like, Mary, we need to have a conversation like you're beginning to write your memoir. And she's like, oh, okay. So let's start with that. So if we were thinking about, like, what are the lessons and the people that shaped you, the businesses that you've led, the board memberships you've held, the lives that you've changed, really leading up to the person that we're seeing here today on this stage?
Yeah, that is such a big question to start with, but I've thought about how to approach that. I really have. But first of all, thank you for having me, and thank you for sponsoring this event. And it's really great that you're a women-led business in the law and the legal field. Congratulations. And I'm thrilled to see many friends and colleagues, and one of my daughters is here. I'm very happy. So my kids are busy, so it's nice when one of them can be here. I'm kidding. But, you know, I guess what I would say, Dory, is now that I feel like I have a little time to reflect and think back, because I've been, you know, working since I was like, I don't know, 13 years old. I mean, I know I'm not alone in this story, but one of the things that I've, you know, as I've especially gotten to know many other female CEOs, we share, a lot of us have in common this sort of grit and drive and self-reliance, which is kind of interesting. And I'll come back to that in a second, but I'd say the chapters, as I thought about how to answer your big picture question, is like, I feel like there's like 3 chapters. One is as a young person, trying to figure out my way and knowing I needed to craft my own destiny. And I can talk about that. But it's just, you know, it's just that I come from a family where my parents didn't go to college. My father worked in a steel factory. So, you know, they didn't really have any sense of how to direct us. They were proud of us, expected us to get good grades, and then figure the rest out. And I see people, like, a lot of people can relate to that. And it is important because not everybody, you know, like, is, you know, has that sort of background. It's part of what I consider almost this American dream, which is still real to me. So a lot of what I look back on is that I had a lot of self-drive, a lot of grit, and you know what? A lot of ambition, which I didn't know about myself. And that was a word that was used negatively about me once early in my career, and it hurt my feelings so much. Because that is a word, and sometimes I'm also wanting to teach, especially for men, to know how things sound to women. Like, I don't think if a man was called ambitious, that would be used in a negative way. But for a woman, it's still, at least it was then, it still sometimes is. And I've actually learned to just like embrace that word, because ambition, and not everybody has the same level of ambition, but I realized that's part of what kept driving me. So there was a chapter like that, and then there's a whole chapter in my career where I was at the Quaker Oats Company and PepsiCo, and that break into consumer packaged goods and Quaker was the biggest break of my career. And I could talk more about that. But that whole chapter was really about me learning from great leaders and sometimes learning from not great leaders. Do you know what I mean? And so one of the things that I really always like to do is I'm adaptable. I like to give situations the benefit of the doubt and try to find the good, and also what can I learn. And some of the leaders I had early in my career at the Quaker Oats Company had mostly women leaders, had people who really just knew how to lead teams and create culture, and that had a huge impact on me. And then I'd say the next chapter where I got more senior in companies to then becoming CEO was when I felt like I kind of went into my full stride and say, okay, how do I take all the stuff I've learned and not only just try to deliver the damn results, which is what it's about when you run a company, but how can I take what I've learned and create environments, leadership teams, and cultures that I can feel proud of, that people can feel seen and heard, and hopefully that also helps us to get great results. So that's kind of the through line, if that makes sense.
No, it makes a lot of sense. So throughout your career, though, you've not only embraced opportunities to make meaningful changes, but also created pathways for others to lead. Was there a defining moment when you realized that this was the kind of leader that you wanted to be?
Yeah, I mean, the notion of creating opportunities for other people is so important to me because people help me with that as well. And so I mentioned this, like at the Quaker Oats Company, I went to University of Illinois at Chicago. Those of us old enough used to call it Circle, and it was a commuter school back then. And I went there, and I got a great education, but honestly didn't even apply anywhere else. I didn't even know I could get scholarships or do anything. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to figure this out. And so got a great education. By the way, that school today is very much like it was when I went there. It's a lot of first generation folks working and putting themselves through school, as I was with many different kinds of jobs. But anyway, so I took a marketing class, fell in love with it, but nobody was recruiting at UIC, especially in consumer packaged goods. But I had a friend who knew me, knew what I was interested in, and thought, I can get your resume to somebody here, but that's all I can do because you didn't go to school that we recruit from. So I've told the story, but I guess the point is, this fellow in HR, he saw my resume. He said, you have all the things that we look for in terms of leadership and academics and whatnot. I'm going to bring you in for the interviews. I think he, thought odds were low. But anyways, I got hired. And then I realized not long after I was hired, I was the first person in that undergrad program that didn't have an Ivy League undergrad. Everybody, I'm sure, thought I went to University of Chicago. I didn't even know the difference back then. I was like, okay, whatever. Sorry, and a U of C grad. So point being, like, that was the first time that I experienced and didn't even know what a valuable thing it was that somebody took a chance on me, okay? And so that is absolutely something that I carried through my entire career because, I'm not trying to say luck is what it's about. It's like you got to create your luck and then try. But I also love to see people grow, and I think I'm a really good judge of people who've got drive and capability to do more. And so, there's people in the audience that I have this experience with where I think throughout my career I was able to see somebody who I thought had great drive and ambition, wanted to do more, and guess what? The more you give some people, the more they are, A, loyal to you and deliver great results, making my job easier because I'm surrounded by great people. But it only kind of started later in my career. I started to hear back from some people. And I didn't have any idea. But years later, I just heard from a woman named Claire Bennett, who was at Quaker Oats in finance. And then she went on to be the head of Amex Travel and then CMO for IHG. And she told me about a year ago, she was giving a speech, and she said that she was talking about how the biggest break she got was when I brought her out of finance into marketing. And that was the first time anybody had made that. You see what I mean? So there's a pattern. And I didn't realize what a big deal that was. And then I would just say recently, one of the things I'd love to do is engage people throughout the company. Well, we can talk about this, but especially in retail who work in the front line every day with our customers, but throughout levels of management. And at Foot Locker, one of the things I did is I engaged people at like the director level, a handful of them, to help us go out and start to just interview. We all do engagement surveys and whatnot, and that's kind of sterile. What you learn from those can be very just quantitative. But I've kind of have this method that I've learned about getting more information, having key people in the company who might be somebody people trust and listen to, that will go gather up 30, 40 people, get feedback, and then come back to me and my executive team as a group and tell us the real deal. Okay, have the courage to do that. So point being, because I know we don't always hear the real deal, this fella just, 2 months ago, emailed me, and he said, I knew he was a fella in finance who I'd see on our financial reviews. A lot of it was, we were kind of dispersed, so I only saw him on screen, but I knew he was really smart, and his leader thought he'd be good at this. Anyways, he emailed me to say that was the biggest thing that happened in my career. And I saw him go from somebody who was a subject matter expert to a real leader. Do you see what I mean? So again, I feel like, and I wasn't trying to be magnanimous. I was trying to actually leverage what I think works. But when people say that to me, I'm like, okay, this is something I got to keep teaching, I guess, at this point.
So I appreciate that, Mary, and I want to talk a little deeply about, we'll pull out some of the specific experiences in retail because I do think that has been almost, for lack of a better word, sort of an impact channel for you. Yeah. But as we talk about, just a few months ago we were here having a program around civic engagement, and I know for you, although I read a lot of the professional credentials, but civic engagement has been something that has absolutely, been something you have been committed to. So we often say that that's sort of what defines leadership, Chicago style, that we have this sort of combination of understanding, of course, business, but then the ecosystem in which it sits in. So how has leadership been enhanced by the impact organizations you've engaged with?
Yeah, and I would say certainly I've spent a lot of time in New York in the last few years because the company is headquartered there, and we all worked in other places. I do believe this is true about Chicago, this leadership, the business community being super engaged. One of the things I'd like to clarify, because sometimes, people read my resume and include everything, and it sounds like I did everything all at once. And guess what? Absolutely not. No, honestly, I didn't engage in anything civic-wise until literally my kids were like in high school, because I was working and raising a family. And I sometimes felt guilty about, like, should I be doing more? You look around, you're like, oh my God, all these people are doing all that. But there's a time and a place for it. So that's just kind of the first thing I want to say. I see a lot of women shaking their heads. You can relate to this. So I took a breath. But when I did get engaged, you know, I think my lane is probably more about, you know, economics and business than it is politics or, you know, that kind of thing. But today was like a great Chicago day. And now, I mean, I am originally from the south side of Chicago, and I live in Evanston now, but I love in this chapter to be able to kind of re-engage. So earlier today, I know David Snyder and here, some of his team are here. I was with them, and we're planning a big celebration for the 100-year anniversary of the Economic Club in 2027. And then I went and spent a couple hours at the Chicago Club that I was first introduced to by Andy McKenna, Sr., the great mentor of all of us. And then I'm here. And so to me, it's like, yeah, I mean,
It's a club day.
It's a club day. But it's a Chicago day. You know, it's a Chicago day, and I think there's a time and a place for it. And I kind of think I probably tried to do too many things at one point when I started to get engaged, and I realized kind of stay in the lane that I think I'm best at.
So let's talk about some of your retail experiences, because you have really just done so much there. So we know, and you started talking about this a little bit, and I was like, oh, I want to go deeper on that. But so in retail, individual consumer demographics and local community identity are so important. How did you approach combining consumer and insights with a broader company strategy to drive success?
Yeah. Well, I mean, probably the best example would be at ULTA Beauty, because I was on a journey there to kind of, first of all, I'd never run a retail company. I'd worked in retail since I was a kid, so that was part of my angle in, is like, I bet you we can learn from the folks that are putting things on the shelves and talking to customers, so we can come back to that. Guess what? People really want to be asked, and if you ask them, they have ideas and they feel more engaged. But what I was going to say is that when I first went to ULTA and I was first approached about the role, I didn't even really, back then, nobody had really even heard about it. I was like, ULTA, Ultra, like, what's that? I don't know. That's what I was saying. My daughters weren't even that, they were not like, they're like, oh, you have teenage daughters. I'm like, yeah, they're not really into the beauty category that much, so I don't know. But anyways, what I sensed is that there would be an interesting opportunity to combine everything I learned in consumer packaged goods, which was everything through the lens of customer, competition, category, cost, and then how do you differentiate through the lens of standing for something bigger than just a product and a price, okay? And so when I went to ULTA, it was very typical of most retailers at the time, which was very siloed, like merchants were kind of the lead of the show. They would get products that they could get, and then that would go over a transom to like marketing to put a picture and a price, and then over a transom into the stores. So the first thing I thought was like, there's probably a bigger kind of thought about how we think about who are we trying to serve. Not just we sell mass to prestige, but what's the mindset and how can we differentiate by understanding that mindset? And that's where we kind of came up with, you know, did deeper work on consumer segmentation and created this category called the beauty enthusiast. I don't even know if it's called that, but you know, folks who are really into the category. So that was kind of one, was to like, and also I remember when I first got there, we had, you know, probably 600 stores at the time, and when a store reached about $2 million in sales, there was an expectation that it had peaked and then it would continue to be flat to down, because that was another thing I took from my consumer packaged goods days, was like, how do you redefine what's possible? So like I worked for this woman, Sue Wellington, and Gatorade years ago. And, you know, if you looked at Gatorade, you're like, well, how much can it grow? It's 90% of the sports beverage market. You know, it's so big. Well, guess what? It was like 10% of what they defined as active thirst. Because most of the time people are thirsty, the closest thing is water, right? So when you redefine, so what I realized is that we were defining limiting our mindset, because that's as high as sales that we'd ever achieved in a certain store, and then we thought it was max. But we only had like a 6% share of the beauty market. When you thought about, oh, wait, we compete with, you know, Amazon, and we compete with, you know, Macy's and Sephora, right? So kind of taking some of those consumer practices to it, I guess. But probably the biggest aha for me was that, you know, I mean, if there was ever a category of consumer products where who you are as a person physically and emotionally matters, I can't think of anything other than beauty that's more that way, right? So it's like all about, how do you want to look? How do you want to feel? What's your skin color? What's your skin tone? What's your hair texture, right? Makes sense in a country that's diverse and getting more diverse all the time. And like, I just thought, like back in my packaged goods days, I think we would have always had that mindset, but in retail, not as much. And in beauty, it's not as much. And you might have heard the story, but Molly McKay was here, she remembers, we were opening up a new store in Hyde Park right after I started. I was like, dang, snap, this is cool. From Chicago, I know Rahm Emanuel, it's like Obama's old neighborhood. Let's do a big press conference, right? I was like, this can be awesome. So I go to the store like 2 weeks before it opens, and I'm like, oh, no, we better not do this press conference, because every picture in the window, with all due respect to blonde Caucasian women, because one of my daughters is blonde, no, but like every picture in the window was not representative, not just of Hyde Park, but of the country we live in. And it was the first time the light bulb went off. I was like, wait, what? I didn't see this. And it wasn't just us, it was the whole industry, right? And so that began a real journey for us. And it was interesting because I think the marketing team at first thought, like, okay, maybe we go back and we customize marketing materials for different parts of the country, and that's really hard. And like, the old Wayne Gretzky, skate to where the puck is going. Just like, we have a diverse country that's going to get more so every day, so why don't we just represent everybody everywhere? And honestly, I feel like that was a moment where people in the company felt seen, for the first time. And I'm not trying to, I don't know, whatever. I just feel like that was one of the times where I was like, this isn't about like just doing what's right. It's about a basic business tenet, but also it did feel right. You know what I mean? And I raise that because, as you know, I'm a little controversial. If I was having that conversation today, I don't know, somebody might be like, hold on, wait a minute. I'm like, no. And last thing I'd say is that when I go back to even the early 2000s at PepsiCo, Steve Reinemund was the CEO when they bought Quaker, and he had a little stump speech of everywhere he'd go around, to different headquarters and talk about priorities for the company. Number one on his list was diversity. This is 26 years ago. And his whole premise was, the country is diverse. We need to understand our customers. If our employees don't represent our customers, we won't be successful. So it's not going to go out of fashion. Yeah. How's that?
I love that, but I was laughing.
I'm off my high horse right now. Well, not really. Just wait.
You kind of leaned over like a whisper. I'm like, they can hear you.
I know. She knows. You don't mind. You don't mind.
I'm not going to hear you, Mary. But that's wonderful. And actually, I love that story so much because I do think it just represents, one, who you are, just recognizing that we need to just represent wherever you are. And I think, especially in a retail space, that means so much, thinking about the different workers there and just the different communities that we're in.
Well, and that was, part of the reason why I went back to run another retail company, which wasn't necessarily the easiest decision, and people are like, why are you doing this, all this stuff. Your phone just fell.
Got another one.
But I do feel like, it's an industry where, you can be a young person not having even gone to college, and a lot of people worked for us at Foot Locker, young people in high school putting themselves through college. And then, it's a place where you can create a real career if you want. And there aren't that many places like that. So that's what inspires me about retail, too.
So I appreciate that because, these are just not little retailers. These are huge retail companies. And so we know that retail and consumer expectations have become increasingly complex and are always evolving. So was there a moment when you felt uniquely positioned to lead in this retail space? Was there a moment that you felt like, yeah, I'm ready for this, I've been prepared for this?
Yeah, I probably touched on it when I said I didn't, when I was first being interviewed to run ULTA, I think half the board was very skeptical about somebody like me because I had not run a retail company before. And so I wasn't sure in some ways, but I also knew two things. One is that I thought I could bring this other mindset to maybe create something more enduring. But I also knew that, I'm also, at this point in my career, humble enough to know what I know and what I don't know. And so that's when I really started really fine-tune and hone the notion of creating the right leadership team. And people with a deep, so one of the most important hires that I made at the beginning was our head of stores, who's now the CEO of the company, Keisha Steelman. But she was the first head of stores that I hired, because even though I had worked in retail, as a 16-year-old at Osco Drug, putting, things on the pegs, but I'd never run a retail company. So partly it was, I think I knew that I had a lot to learn, but also things to bring.
So when we think about just where we sit, I know you and I tend to be optimistic, but we know that leaders must be, yes, optimistic and realistic. So situations really require seeing the world as it is while you're inspiring teams with the vision for what's possible. So how do you balance that realism and optimism really in the face of disruption and everything we have going on?
Yeah, well, it's not getting easier, and it's a really disruptive time. On the most basic level, I'd say I am inherently optimistic, but having a really good realistic / pessimistic CFO is always a good idea. No, I'm dead serious. All the finance people know what I mean. Like, rate her in, And I honestly, I learned. I really, like the commitments you make to the street as a CEO, you get a public report card every 3 months. It's not easy. So you need to balance, I think. But I also think it's helpful for the organization to have a leader that sees what is possible, right? So I think that balance is good. But, at the risk of maybe being a little controversial again, but you told me I could. Yeah, I know we're not whispering, I'm just kidding. But what I say is that the most recent example, and so I'm not running a company right now after, my company Foot Locker was sold to Dick's Sporting Goods. But when I was running Foot Locker, it was a time of great change that was just starting to happen in the country. And so we own different banners. So there's the Foot Locker banner, Kids Foot Locker, Champ Sporting Goods. You probably never heard of this one. It's called WSS, and it's headquartered in LA. And it serves largely Hispanic neighborhoods and families, largely Hispanic employees and executives as well. And, when certain things started happening in the country around ICE, it first started in LA, okay? And it really was a moment for me as a leader, because in all my prior experience as a leader, I felt I could be vocal or very much wanted to support my teams, and all that was rattling around in my head. And so the positive side is like, hey, how do I at a minimum show my support for our team that, wasn't sharing a lot with us, but I knew I wasn't under any, impression that they weren't under duress. So, but then it had to be balanced, with what's possible. And so at first there was a lot of what I couldn't say or do, and then I was like, well, why don't we just turn this to what we can? Why don't we just, and what I knew we could do, pretty simple. Let's just have a conversation. Let's just have a listening session, bring together my executive team, some of whom I don't think were really that aware of what was happening, with the WSS executive team, and simply just say, hey, let's just talk about how you guys are doing. And they said a lot about how their families were feeling and their employees. And, and we navigated, I think, well, simply to just say, here's resources we have, to help support you. I wasn't, going to become somebody's immigration lawyer. I mean, obviously there's only certain things you can do. But honestly, my instincts were right, because that went, I think, really far. And when the team actually was pushing me to do more, to make public statements or whatever, I was like, my gut is telling me, you guys, that might just make things worse. And I hate to say that, but let's just manage what we can. You see what I mean? So that to me felt like balancing realism, optimism, and I'm glad I did.
No, that's such a great example, Mary, because we often talk about this, bringing your authentic self to work, and how powerful an idea it is. But as you described, it's really not always easy. So when did you first feel truly seen and validated in your career, and how did that shape your commitment to fostering the same environment for others?
Yeah, it's such a great question, because that is probably what I struggled with the most recently, was how do I just be who I am and navigate that and be savvy and smart. You run a public company, you have a lot of stakeholders. I think maybe a couple things. One is I've learned, it took me a while to figure out that just being who I am is the best thing I can do. And I know that sounds so basic, but also, I never really defined myself by my title and by my job. And I think my family would attest to this. I go home at night, nobody really wanted to hear about what my day was. As they got older, maybe they did. But my husband, who stayed home with our kids, for most of the time, they were just okay, let's, whether it was baths and bedtime or homework later, right? It's so part of it was being authentic to who I am, and also I'd say never putting myself in a business situation where I felt if this doesn't match my values, I want to be in a position where I can make a choice to leave. I know that sounds easier said than done, but just really knowing that. But in a more early part in my career, the biggest aha, I'm sure you have not heard the story, because I realize I don't want to repeat myself too much, but when I was at McDonald's, when I went to McDonald's, it was the first really big epiphany I had, that how different cultures can be, and how coming in from the outside, especially at a pretty senior level, especially as a woman in a company that didn't have a lot of women executives, and then you're bringing a whole other set of more ways to make decisions and culture. All of a sudden, I just thought I could just skate in there and just bring what I know. And no, it was a lot harder than that. But I learned a lot from it. But one of the first things that happened was that McDonald's, there might be some folks from McDonald's here, there usually is, because it's a big company here in Chicago, but they used to have, and probably still have every couple years, their big global convention with the franchisees from all around the world. So as it turns out, I was going to be one of the speakers. There's very few speakers, but because I was a global head of marketing, I was going to be one of the speakers. So at the PepsiCo and Quaker Oats days, when you went up to give a presentation, you never had a script. It was always slides and data and storytelling, but different, you know. So all of a sudden, I was like, oh, wait, no, you're at the global convention. We're giving you a speech writer, we're giving you a speech coach, and we're gonna figure this out, right? So I'm like, okay, I didn't know that's what I thought I had to do. So the first time I did it, the first year, I would give myself like a 5 out of 10. It was just, I thought it was just like, okay, not great, but I did what I was told. I mean, I know this sounds kind of lame, I'm pretty senior, but I'm still doing what, you know, sometimes you got, but I was like, and then I was like, okay. So then when I was gonna do it again, I was like, damn, I wanna do this better. And that's where it hit me one day. And it was this crazy thing when YouTube was just starting to be a thing. God, I'm old. And there was a funny, there was this kid doing this parody, like a Chicken McNugget commercial, really funny thing, okay? So somehow I figured out a way to integrate that. I was like talking about new media or talking about whatever, and I literally just started singing the song. And I put the video, I started doing it. And all of a sudden I realized the whole rest of the speech, I felt so confident and I was having fun. So that was when I was like, you know what, I'm not gonna have anybody tell me how I need to sound. And even like I did an investor conference once, one of the first big ones I had to do, and I went out and did a little part of a rap, which is the main thing they talked about. I was like, okay, you know, if that's what you guys need, I'll do it. But the point being, like, I found that is just not, you know, just another example, like, okay, if you can just be yourself, that's better.
I'm glad I didn't know that story because I would have absolutely decided that we would do a rap duo today. So you better be glad I didn't know that story.
Let's go. Let's go.
Next time, for sure, Mary. So I'll say, although I'm having a lot of fun here with Mary, that we want you to text your questions to exec@22333. I think it's in your programs as well, so feel free to do that and help me co-moderate, Mary. I appreciate that. I'm going to put that one in my back pocket, though. But Mary, you mentioned your husband, and I know being in senior leadership roles and a working parent can shape both perspective and ambition. How did that responsibility influence your career decisions and leadership style?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot to unpack there, but you know, I think what's interesting is, in everybody's story and journey is different. You do find the more senior women you meet like me, the more you see this kind of situation where, you know, you might have one person who's more at home and one who's leading the career, and you see this a lot now with senior women. You know, I fully respect people that have 2 big careers. I mean, like, that's awesome. I think that's one of the hardest things to do. And then in most instances, right, it has traditionally been more the male career takes the lead. But Terry and I we met when I was 19 years old, and I asked him out on our first date at the Circle campus. Anyways, but we had no idea like where our lives are going to go. I mean, he's better educated, way more well-read. Thank God my kids all inherited his love of reading, because like I think they think I'm illiterate. I don't really have time to read that many books, you know, but they got a lot from him. But anyways, he was studying, he was a biochemist and was working in the drug industry when I started at Quaker. And it just sort of became kind of clear fairly early on how, again, that word ambition, I wasn't using it, but like I was really driven, I loved my work, and it was kind of clear that like I was probably had a better trajectory in terms of being able to make a good salary, and we were just figuring it out, you know. And so after our first child was born, who's now 36, my son, I actually created a job sharing program at Quaker Oats in 1984, and that was the whole thing, and I'm really glad I did. So I went back to work 3 days a week as a brand manager, and Terry was working full-time. We did that whole routine. And then when I was pregnant with my second child, we just thought we'd give it a try for him to stay home for a while, and it changed our lives. I mean, we had 2 more kids after that. So, I had to really sell him on number 4. He was like, okay. He's like, you like being pregnant. You like giving birth and going back to work. And then I'm here. I'm like, okay, good point. But I would say that probably the most important thing that happened for us is we kind of grew and learned as we went. And, you know, it wasn't always easy to do that because there's certain things like, you know, where women, you know, like you're supposed to bring your spouse's stuff and that's not really his vibe. And I figured at some point, I just let that go. It's like, you know what, he doesn't have to come to stuff. We're totally fine with that, right? The most important thing for us is that our mothers were the most incredibly supportive people on the planet. Because when you think about it, this was not like a normal paradigm, even then, 30-some years ago. And both of them just were like, hey, this is, you know, and I've seen families, honestly, where there's some of the family doesn't support the man staying home because it's so out of the paradigm. So I see people shaking their heads. I've seen that happen a few times. So I really think that helped us a lot, too.
So you have to tell my favorite story, Mary, about your kids learning about who your new boss was going to be?
Yeah, no, dead serious. I was saying at the beginning that I've had mostly female bosses. One of my very best friends was one of my Margaret Stender. We're very good friends. But so when Quaker was bought by PepsiCo, Steve Reineman did a town hall, and I came home to dinner that night, and I said to my kids, "Oh, we met our new CEO today." And my son, I don't know how old he was, 5 or something. Well, what is she like? Now, and he wasn't trying to be cute. Like, he literally thought there were only female CEOs. And my husband and I were like, "Gosh, Jack, you could be a CEO too someday." He's in law enforcement right now, but anyway. That's when the light bulb went off for me. I was like, "Oh, that's so interesting." But what's weird, and I'm not trying to harp on this, you guys, but I'm just saying, if you don't think this is on women's minds, it is. The hands of time in some ways have gone backwards, okay? Like what I experienced and saw, coming into an industry like, the footwear industry, the first time I walked into a big meeting at Adidas where they had retailers from all over the world, again, it just is what it is. It's not right or wrong, but it's like, it's just good for me to, I walked into this room, I was like, okay, wait, so I am by far one of the only Americans in the room, because this was like all these like 40-year-old former, football players across Europe that run all these companies, and like, okay, I'm by far one of the only Americans, and by far one of the very oldest in this room, and I am definitely one of the only women. And it was just a couple years ago, right? And I had many women in the industry say to me, "Hey, so happy you took this job," because we just don't see that enough. So anyways, it's just interesting.
I had to see that because that's like one of my favorite stories, and I learned that years ago, but it's one of my favorite stories. So thank you all for submitting all these great questions. So I will get to some of these because I really want to reflect what you want to know. So one of the questions we have here, Mary, is what leadership trends are you seeing over the last few years that have surprised you? What leadership trends do you expect to emerge in the future?
See, when people write questions, they ask really hard questions. Because they have time to think about it. They have time to think about it. And then I'm like, no, do the spontaneous question. Because I don't always have all the great answers. Here's what I would say. Like, leadership, the only leadership model that I know, that I've honed, that I believe in strongly, is this notion of being a leader that creates a team of real functional experts who work together to solve enterprise problems and collaborate, okay? I can go on for an hour on that. I won't. The opposite of that.
We'll have you come back and do a workshop on that.
No, honestly, because I feel strongly, because the opposite of that is what I call sort of more like command and control. Neither is right or wrong, but like this is where I learned early on in a tougher situation. I was much earlier in my career, but I worked for a boss who he had all the answers. He was really smart. I learned a lot from him. But he had a series of people that worked for him, and it was kind of like whoever was in his ear last got. And then he was pitting people against each other, and he was kind of telling people and directing what to do. Okay, fine. But all of a sudden, I didn't feel like I was the best I could ever be. I felt really insecure and really like this is really hard. And that's when I kind of realized that was so as I kind of developed my own model for leading, the only thing I would say is I feel like this command and control leads to people not speaking truth to power. And I think at a time that the world is more uncertain than ever, having people be able to tell you what they really think or what the organization thinks is more important than ever. So I would like to see more leadership in the future that is around how do you engage folks to be true speak to power leaders. I thought you were going to ask me what the rap was. It's tricky to rock a rhyme to rock a rhyme to rock a time. It's tricky. I was kind of talking about how
Run
retail
DMC,
is tricky.
We could have worn Adidas and everything. We could have really did that, Mary.
I know.
Next time, for sure. So there's a question about what neighborhood on the south side are you from?
Yes.
And how has your early life experience through your household and neighborhood made your corporate leadership skills even better?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, I know you guys probably don't believe me, but I was born in West Inglewood. And I know you guys are like, really? In 1961, 72nd and Damon, and this is one of the things I love about this part of the story is that, if you go down my block today, the houses look exactly the same. And I know we think about Inglewood, we know there's crime, we know there's challenges, but there's also lots of folks just trying to raise their families in these 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom bungalows that look exactly the same. When I was there, I'd say maybe the way it most shaped me was, it was all families that were like mine, which is blue collar. A lot of fathers who had Irish accents. I mean, my grandfathers were from Ireland, but, it was a very kind of hardworking labor union, but not financially secure. I mean, I was often worried about my dad getting laid off or worried about strikes and things like that. So I would say all of that is what kind of started hey, I got to figure out, how do I create a more stable and a better life. I mean, a better defining in the stability aspect of it. So that was really shaping. But one time when I was running U.S. Cellular, just as an aside, I met a young black man who was a charter school principal in Chicago, and we started comparing our Chicago stories. And he had moved from the Robert Taylor homes, which many of you probably don't even know were there, but he moved there to West Englewood, the exact same year I moved from Englewood to, my parents moved out to the suburbs. It was the same kind of, it was that story of like, this family just wanted to keep doing better. So I think it's important to keep that in mind.
Well, and I think that probably, other than your rap skills, I'm sure that definitely has influenced you in many different ways in terms of how you approach your work. You've spoken about being very intentional in your leadership. How do you approach decision-making with purpose, and what does intentional leadership look like to you in practice?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'd say just maybe a couple simple things when I think about decisions. One is being really, really clear about what are we trying to solve for. I know that sounds so simple, but so often we go off, like the story I was telling you about, how do we think about being more inclusive and how we show up in the beauty industry. We're not trying to solve for looking different everywhere. We're trying to, right? Mm-hmm. So often I'll ask that. And then the other thing I try to teach people is listening. Like when you have a group of people in the organization and they're there to ask you questions, it's a Q&A. Really understand what's behind the question, because people aren't asking you a question because they're curious. They have either an issue or a solution they want to serve up. So using those kinds of inputs to decision making is kind of how I get intentional.
There's so many. You've opened up a great can of worms here, Mary. So, so you've led 3 companies as CEO. Which company was the most challenging to lead and why? And I'll add a little more to that question. Or what was one of the key takeaways you've had from each of your CEO roles?
Yes. Okay, I'll try to be brief on that. U.S. Cellular, I appreciate so much that Ted Carlson, who was the son of the founder of the company, gave me a shot to run a company where I had, I was not in that industry. Wait, I see somebody from U.S. Cellular here too. Hi, Linnell. Oh my gosh, it's so good.
This is like this the story of your life.
Good. I was like, wow, this is your life. But anyway, so what I learned, and they took a shot on me. What I learned there is like, I wasn't my best as a leader when I was in an environment where I felt like it was a slow, kind of steady decline or withdrawal. Like, we had to leave some markets or maybe close call centers. And while I could do that, it was hard for me to show up enthusiastic because I didn't feel great about that. Do you know what I mean? So that's kind of why when ULTA came my way, I was like, I felt bad leaving as early as I did because I was only there 3 years. But I felt like to truly be the leader I can be, I think I need to be in an environment where I think I can grow it. The hardest by far was Foot Locker, even though I have a great sneaker collection and it was a lot of fun. But I think I underestimated, I didn't think I was going to go in and just like wave a magic wand and make it so. There were certainly things from ULTA that we did apply, whether it was, improving e-com or the stores. But there's this thing called supplier concentration risk, which is often listed in companies' 10Ks, and it's real. So like at ULTA Beauty, at any given day, there was like, 500 brands on the shelf at any time. So when one brand is up, one's down, category, skincare's up, makeup's down, whatever. At Foot Locker, when I got there, 73% of our sales were Nike. So, and then after that, it was Adidas, and then after that, it was everybody else. So by the time I left, we balanced that out and got it down to more like 50-some% Nike. But the problem is they were also in a bit of a slump on innovation. And so when your biggest supplier is down 10 or 15%, you cannot work magic on that. And so that was a challenge for me because we were always chasing after the financial result that we were trying to achieve. So.
Well, you should know my husband did his part.
Yes, I appreciate that.
It's like
I
those
know,
new
I
Jordans.
saw.
Yeah. It's like we did our part. We tried, Mary. So let's talk a little bit about what we're seeing from a generational perspective. So one of the questions here says that Gen Z and Alpha focus on entrepreneurship. How will that evolve from a CEO's perspective? How do you see that CEO roles evolving as that generation focus on entrepreneurship more?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think that I'm probably not the best suited to answer that in that, like a lot of times people are starting a business, they might want my advice. I'm like, guess what? I never started a business from scratch. Like I never did. But I would say actually in today's world, it's easier than ever to be entrepreneurial and maybe more required than ever to figure out how you want to create your own economic financial security. So, I think it's an interesting trend, but I'm not expert at that. How's that?
You're so self-aware.
I bet there's 20 people here who can answer that back.
I'm sure. Yeah. So, but as we talk about our values and think about what we're really good at, how do you ensure your personal values stay aligned with the organizations that you've led, and how do you reinforce that alignment with your teams?
Yeah, I mean, maybe the single most important thing I kind of finally figured out is that I really need people to have a strong alignment with me about valuing and respecting people, which sounds like the most basic, like, oh, that's an entry-level thing. It's not. It's not. And I learned that. And I think because that I came from jobs, I mean, one of my favorite stories, like I worked at R.J. Grunt's to put myself through college. My picture's still up on the wall across from the bar. But, you know, when you're a waitress, like, and I was like all the yuppies, I was just talking to somebody, a CEO in Chicago, and I was like, you know what, you were probably one of those yuppies that I was serving at the Sunday brunch, and some of you people really pissed me off, okay? Because I felt like there were, like, you could just learn a lot about how people treat people in those situations, okay? And here I was, like a young, striving kid in college, but looked at as a waitress. And then when I went to ULTA, I thought, you know, again, Molly knows this, but like the folks in the stores probably have a heck of a lot of wisdom. And so I kind of was like, okay, I want to figure out how to unleash that. But I also learned that sometimes the more people go up in an organization, they don't even know they're doing it, but they think they have to be the expert in everything. And then when people are afraid to ask questions or afraid to sound stupid or whatever. And it was really just like, how do I either teach or suss out, do people share the value of, yeah, the ideas that coming in from the field might be kind of tactical, but sometimes they're really important tactical ones. And sometimes if you just implement a couple, it can create a flywheel of engagement, right? So that's something you can't really teach. And I'd say to me that became, you know, besides the basic things of like leading with integrity and all this stuff, but to me that notion of truly like caring about people and respecting them is core.
So Mary, one of the things that I've admired about you is that, so I'm a business nerd, and one of my colleagues in here, Brian, he's always doing my research and impressing me with like amazing news, like, you know, thinking about how Foot Locker was once, I think it's Woolworth? Foot Locker started as Woolworth, and then, excuse me, and then ULTA Beauty was the beauty section of, was it Dominic's? It was one of the...
Oh, no, but so former, I think Osco Drug
yeah.
executive started it.
Yeah, that's what it was. So we nerd out on these things, and one of the things that I respect about you is that you recognize that reinvention is always something that has to happen and isn't optional. At ULTA, you fueled unprecedented growth. At Foot Locker, you faced the challenge of repositioning in a highly disruptive, as you talked about, retail environment. How do you know when it's time to pivot versus stay the course?
Yeah, no perfect answer, but I've learned anything, you have to be paranoid all the time. Like I talked about, I'm optimistic, I'm a positive person, but I'm the first one to be like, this ain't gonna last, because I've been around enough cycles, you know what I mean? Yeah. So I do think that notion of just pushing yourself with your strategy teams or strategically to be like, you know, how are our competitors, you know, being very, very realistic about how your competitors are doing. Mm-hmm. I just had a meeting with our Save the Children colleagues with a big donor, and I could tell the questions that this donor who was has somebody with a very big family office, and I could tell the questions that they were asking. I was like, oh, they probably have every major organization like CARE and Mercy Corps in front of them. So we know what we do and what it's great about it, but if we're not openly, really understanding, you know, not that we compete, but like just making sure we understand that, you know, how others are positioning. So I'd say you constantly have to be realistic about what's happening in the marketplace with competition. You know I'm like a broken record on this, but when I was at ULTA, I was like, let's please just keep talking to teenagers and 10-year-olds and 13-year-olds all the time, because we're getting older every day, and same with footwear. The trends are really happening with young people, and if we're not connected with them, we lose the plot line. So I think it's about just forcing yourself to always like not believe you've got it totally figured out.
So as we kind of wrap up the conversation, I have two more questions. One is, as we've already talked about a little bit, that the world continues to evolve. How do you stay reflective and focused on what matters most, and what practices help you continue learning and growing?
Yeah, I am really curious to keep learning, and in this chapter, I really am too, because like even just since I was CEO last September, like agentic AI and what's happening in retail and shopping, I'm like, holy cow. So I need to stay current even just to help people learn and to, you know, be relevant myself. So I would say it's like, you know, just whatever. I'm trying to stay connected, reading, involved with like reading things that consulting firms are doing. And then just, you know, I don't know, not getting too wrapped up in it and just living my life as well, you know, as a grandmother and a mother.
Oh, that's awesome.
You know?
So we do have one last question that came in on the iPad here, and you brought it up, Mary. Who's your favorite rap artist or musical artist?
Oh, I have so many favorites. Now, I love Run DMC. That's why that just came. I am pretty good at finding a song for a moment, and I recently, most people are too old, but like, to know this, but there was a McKinsey meeting when I first went to Foot Locker. It was a Monday morning, the technology wasn't working, and the McKinsey partner told the story. She goes, we were really stressed out, because like, oh my God, the new CEO, AV is not working. And I literally broke out to, just another manic Monday. Okay, and she was like, you can't believe how that changed. And you guys don't know what was that, the Bangles, thank you. But like, so no, I have a lot. I have a lot up my sleeve. Just the situation.
You know what? You need to curate a playlist for us so we can get out there. We need to curate a playlist.
It tends towards yacht rock right now, maybe. I don't know.
So let's give Mary a wonderful round of applause. Thank you, Mary. Mary, we do have a little something for you. When we stalk people, there you go. Sorry. Yes, you can. Yeah. When we stalk people on social, we find things that we hope. So Mary was, yes, from Save the Children. I was like, we saw this poster or this picture. We're like, oh my God, that's so Mary. Thank you. So with that, again, thank you, Mary, and thank you to the amazing Executives Club staff in the Ivory Room here for the hospitalities, and to our wonderful sponsors, Aspiration Catalyst. Kim Sabota, who could not be here today, was a fan of you, and she wrote a new book, Bold Leadership, which she signed and provided for you there as well. And of course, Jessica with Croak Fairchild. And also, I'll bring up my boss, David Hamplin, the board chair of the Executives Club of Chicago, and the CEO of Point B Consulting, who's also a sponsor of today's event, to close us out. David.
Thank you, Dory. Thank you very much, Mary. As Dory said, my name is David Hanfland. I'm the President and CEO of Point B and also the board chair for the Executives Club. And Dory says I'm her boss. I know better than that. I work for her. Thank you very much for a wonderful conversation. I think very thoughtful insights regarding leadership, and three things that I took away. One, create teams that work for you and that are really bonded together. Second is the balance of realism versus optimism. I thought that was amazing. And then finally, having the courage to be yourself. And I'll just say, I'm not going to rap. So Point B is proud to sponsor today's program. For more than 30 years, we've been helping companies adapt, change their mission to adapt to new challenges, technology, other events that are pushing them, and that takes leadership. And I appreciate the comments that Mary made in terms of how she's led such iconic brands and iconic companies. Thank you for being here with us today. We invite you to continue the conversation and the reception here after the event. And if you're interested in getting more information or involved with the Executives Club of Chicago or attending future programs, please connect with the staff or a board member, and we're happy to provide you more information, or you can go to executivesclub.org. Thank you very much.